Tim Fuller is back with Missouri basketball, and could Bill Laurie's money be coming with him?
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And I feel like I should clarify my comments from earlier from the previous week when I said Missouri perhaps overplayed its hand a little bit, going back to the Big Ten discussions. Gosh, this was 15 years ago now, believe it or not. Also want to talk a lot of Missouri basketball on the show. And if I'm sounding and looking a little different here today, that's because I'm away from my home office. But frankly, there's just too much going on right now. I just had to get in front of a microphone and talk some Tigers with all of you. And right now, the big news is with basketball as Tim Fuller. Yes, that Tim Fuller, the former assistant coach under Frank Haith and under Kim Anderson for a brief period of time as well, has returned to the University of Missouri basketball program in a pretty shocking move. I mean, certainly one that I didn't see coming. I don't know anybody who would have predicted this move because, well, to be brutally honest with you, the Tim Fuller era didn't end particularly well at Missouri. And honestly, part of the ending of that was, of course, well, his first tenure at Missouri. Obviously, the Kim Anderson thing didn't exactly work out on about a million different levels. But then he also was accused of breaking some NCAA rules and all that kind of good stuff. So if you're going, wait a second, do we want this guy back in our program? I'd be going, rules? Excuse me, I'm feeling about as incredulous as the LA police officer when the Big Lebowski's going, do you have any leads on my stolen vehicle? And the guy laughs in his face. That's how I feel about the rules right now. So to bring in Tim Fuller in an environment where there are no rules, again, let's just laugh and yuck it up on that particular point. I think what's really interesting here is the connections that Tim Fuller had and actually has even built on those connections over the past decade or so since he was with Missouri. Not just with Overtime Elite, a program that he helped found, by the way, also with Nike, a whole bunch of agents, which is really important in the NIL environment when, yes, college basketball and football players, they have agents now. This is a common thing. This is about as common as having shoes and underwear at this point. All of these guys who are any level of player have agents. So if you're going to need to go through those waters, navigate through them, well, that's a lot of work. And guess who doesn't have very much time, free time? Dennis Gates, the head coach of Missouri. So in theory, this should take a lot off of Dennis Gates' plate. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this. Tim Fuller is back as the general manager of Missouri. He's not going to be on the bench. This is an important note here. So basically, Tim Fuller, it seems like, is going to take as much as he possibly can. I'm sure he'll hire some underlings as well, but he and his team will take as much off of Dennis Gates' plate off of the court, while then Dennis Gates will be able to focus on basketball, quite simply. That seems like a pretty good setup to me. But here's what's really interesting. I mentioned his connections. Of course, Tim Fuller, again, Overtime Elite, Nike, a whole bunch of agents. Well, this is something I thought about mentioning, but I was kind of hesitant to because I didn't know really what to make of it. But you know what? Since Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou put it out there, I'm going to mention it too. Apparently, Tim Fuller and Bill Laurie, yes, of the Walmart fortune, that Bill Laurie, apparently they're pretty well connected. And of course, in the past, Bill Laurie has been very much connected to Missouri basketball. The Page Sports Arena, of course, Page, his daughter, the Page Sports thing was named after her. Obviously, Bill had a big hand in building that arena. Well, what's interesting is now a couple decades or so since Missouri built Mizzou Arena, well, back then, of course, the only legal channels that having a big time, rich, wealthy booster could help you is facilities, building a new sparkling arena, that type of deal. Well, now, if indeed this is the case, and that is the speculation happening right now, if indeed Laurie is back in the fold through the relationship with Fuller, that kind of deal, I mean, this could potentially be a game changer for Dennis Gates in the future, in the transfer portal, in high school recruiting as well, because guess what? Money is now very much the name of the game. Texas Tech basically just bought their way into the softball national championship or Final Four. Forgive me for not following that sport particularly closely this year with Mizzou out of it. But I do know that they paid $1 million essentially for the best pitcher in the entire country. And Texas Tech, well, they're trying everything they can right now to build winners in basically every single sport. And they're doing it with I call that landman money, the oil money that is down in Lubbock, Texas. That is a real thing. And in the past, obviously it was difficult to lure maybe some of the best talent, maybe some young guys out to West Texas. I mean, Lubbock is not a bad place or anything, but it is incredibly isolated relative to the rest of much of the rest of major college football. So I just think it's really interesting that so many teams like Missouri and Texas Tech, I've said this ad nauseum, worth saying again, that these teams who are in the major conferences but are not traditional blue blood type powers, these are the teams that benefit from this new setup the most. And it's why the old guard is not terribly happy about it. So bottom line here, while this move, the hiring of Tim Fuller as Missouri's general manager, seemingly came out of nowhere to me and everybody else I know who follows the Missouri basketball program closely, I don't think this is a move. This is an obvious statement, but this is not a move that I don't think Dennis Gates made this lightly. I think there's got to be, in his mind, he's got to think there's some really, really good reasons to bring this guy back because, again, surprising. This is about as surprising a move as I've seen at Mizzou for a long time. But I got to tell you, I'm pretty optimistic about it. Again, I think if Dennis Gates likes it, then I like it. I really do. I trust his basketball judgment for the most part. And off the court, this could be a real game changer for Mizzou. And speaking of Texas Tech, by the way, something I've talked a lot about on the previous show, including on the SEC squad last week with my buddy Stephen Willis over at Locked On Ole Miss. Well, Stephen thinks, by the way, that if we do get to a super league, if the Big Ten and the SEC, if they break away from the rest of college football, they break away from the NCAA, Stephen thinks the number is going to be 40 teams. So you got 16 in the SEC, you got 18 in the Big Ten, that's 34. So, hey, there's a half dozen spots open for business there. And it seems like Texas Tech, one thing they're doing right now, they're not just trying to win for the short term, but long term, I think pretty clearly they're trying to get the attention of the Southeastern Conference, or even the Big Ten for that matter. Obviously, the Big Ten doesn't care about geography. They care about expanding their reach, and Texas is one gigantic football spot where they still could potentially get their claws in there, that type of deal. So I do think that's really, really interesting. Another thing that's an interesting question, if this does happen, by the way, I'm not rooting for this, by the way. I want to make that really clear. I don't want the Super League thing to happen. To me, that's too much like the NFL now. We're obviously moving more and more toward an NFL-like model. But to simply have that amount of teams, I just think, I don't know, that just really changes what college football is. And while it would definitely be entertaining and I would certainly keep watching, I'm not saying I'm going away from it as the diehard college football Missouri fan and basketball fan that I am. But again, as a fan of the sport in general, I just don't think that that's necessarily healthy. I think one thing that's great about college football and unique to college football is there's all these different places like Columbia, Missouri, that for a few Saturdays a year are just, it feels like the biggest place and the biggest event in the world, even though most of the year it's just kind of a normal, relatively sleepy town. That, you know, whatever description you want to say. My point is, while it may be good for the pocketbooks of a few of those elite institutions who get in there, I don't know. I'd still like to see Northwestern have a football team that's competitive, for example. Bad example because they're in the Big Ten. I just realized that as I said that. But I think you know what I'm getting at here. I still want Washington State and Oregon State to play football. I still want North Carolina State to be a viable program in Division I major athletics. And if this Super League happens, I'm just not sure that's going to be the case anymore. And I think there's a lot of major programs, like NC State is a pretty good example, that could be really in danger. Teams that have been, again, not a great football program, a basketball program that's won a couple national titles. And regardless, they have tons of fans. And I just don't want to see them get completely screwed over. And coming up on the program, I had at least a couple listeners who took issue with my phrasing that Missouri had overplayed its hand with the Big Ten all of those years ago. And you know what? My listeners have a point. So let me clarify my comments here in just a minute. First, though, let's talk some Monarch Money, because if you ever check your bank account and wonder, where is my freaking money? Well, between all your online shopping, dining out, entertainment, it is easy to lose track. Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in, because it's not just a budgeting app, it is a complete financial command center. And when it's so easy to lose track because if you're like me, you've got multiple accounts, multiple credit cards, even some LLCs, all of that kind of stuff. I'm telling you, once you get an LLC going, you divide your money up a little bit, you're going to be surprised at how easy it is to lose track of things. Well, you've got all-in-one convenience with Monarch Money, and easy to collaborate with your partner, your spouse, whoever else it might be. Regardless, you're just going to take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Well, let's open up the show to you, the studio audience here, for just a minute. I suppose not a studio audience, but it sounded good in my head. But regardless, let's get to it. Not Blake Stark. Who's that supposed to be? Who's this mysterious stranger? Well, anyway, Not Blake Stark says, I would argue the Big Ten overplayed its hand with Missouri. We, rightfully, wouldn't go for that junior member BS. He did not say BS. So they took the desperate Huskers who would. Got themselves no TVs and hapless football with the longest bowl drought in college football at one point. Hey, any shade thrown at Nebraska's way is definitely okay with me, but disagreeing with me, be careful. But no, seriously, folks, I think Blake makes a pretty good point here, and I think what I said perhaps Missouri overplayed its hand. What I was doing there is I was letting the word perhaps do a lot of heavy lifting there. I was hoping people would remember the whole Jay Nixon fiasco, the former Missouri governor who basically went public kind of bragging about, hey, we're going to the Big Ten, isn't going to be great. And then suddenly, well, the rug was pulled out from under Missouri. So regardless of going back and relitigating that whole thing, obviously Missouri ended up in a great spot. We all realize that. My whole point was that it wasn't so much the Missouri messed up. I was really kind of pointing more towards Jay Nixon of, I think he learned a lesson there, like when the SEC, when those wheels got in motion, you notice Jay didn't say anything the second time around. So a lesson may have been learned there. All I was saying is perhaps even Notre Dame, certainly other members of the ACC and the Big 12, if you're not Notre Dame, if you're not Clemson, if you're not Florida State, you better just shut up and be quiet at this point. That was my main thing, because if you want to get into whatever the future of college football looks like, you're probably going to have to go along with what the SEC and the Big Ten wants, because, well, that's a lesson that Texas and Oklahoma have recently learned as well. And listener Brian Simpson, hey, one of my favorite stand-up comedians, by the way. Brian writes, when it comes to basketball, do you still think it's possible for Missouri to sign another player by next month? Any ideas who we are looking at the moment? Well, as to your first question, not only is it possible, I think it's probably likely that Missouri signs another guy in this month. And remember, while June does seem really late in the basketball portal process, each of the past 2 seasons, Missouri has signed a center at this point in this month of June. Last year it was Josh Gray. The year before that it was Connor Vanover. And to your second question, again, both of these guys provide a pretty good example here. I'm not sure that a lot of people saw the Josh Gray thing coming this previous offseason, I should say. And 2 years before that, I don't think anybody saw the Connor Vanover thing coming, really. He had seemingly quit college basketball at that point. You know, Dennis Gates basically had to talk him into coming back and playing. So as to who are we looking at, I have absolutely no idea. And if Missouri does indeed sign another one, uses their final spot next year, which I assume they will, it'll probably be somebody who comes off the radar. Probably a center, quite honestly. Maybe a point guard. You never know. But I could see a big guy coming in for sure. But that's where I'm looking at this point. But there is definitely a possibility Missouri wouldn't take another guy. I could see that happening if there's just nobody out there they feel like is worth it. That would make some sense to me, because putting 15 guys on your roster is one thing, but you're never going to play all of them. So having 14, I just don't really see that as a gigantic issue, especially when you can essentially carry that roster spot over for another year in recruiting. And when it comes to football recruiting, I've seen a decent amount of talk lately by fans in the Mizzou beat that the Tigers this time around are taking more developmental high school prospects as opposed to maybe the heavy hitters, like a guy like Williams Winery and Courtney Crutchfield, a couple of guys who were with Missouri for one season before transferring. And part of that is cost, I've got to imagine, because here's the deal. If you're going to, basically every freshman more or less is going to be a developmental prospect. Even Winery was to a large extent a developmental prospect, but he was not paid like a developmental prospect. He was paid like he was one of the 5 best players on the team, essentially. Certainly one of the 10 best. I don't have any question about that. So on one hand, just in terms of dollars and cents, certainly focusing more on the portal makes sense. But focusing more on developmental high school guys, I'm not sure if I've completely bought into that yet, because you do need a level of buy-in to your program from said developmental high school players. Take Whit Hafer, for example, the son of former Missouri basketball player Jeff Hafer, by the way. Well, Missouri took him as a tight end out of high school. He's now transitioned into the offensive line. You know, he's a Mizzou legacy and a guy that, you know, from a local program, you know, maybe he is the kind of guy who can be patient enough. But it's not just, of course, these days, heck, every day, but especially these days in the portal environment, it's not just about can you, the player, can you be patient enough, but can the coaching staff be patient with you too? It's easy to say, hey, we're going to keep these kids around and develop them. But if they're not developing quite at the pace that you would like, it's really easy to get impatient when there's always the new shiny objects of new recruits coming in each and every offseason. So this is definitely an interesting discussion. And interestingly, the 2023 class, which was not as highly ballyhooed by the rankings, has already turned out more productive players for Missouri than that ballyhooed 2021 class. So I just think all of this, the transfers here, and by transfers, I mean the changing landscape of all this, all the transitions of where this sport is going, I just think are incredibly interesting. Hopefully Missouri's ahead of it. So far, they've done a great job of it. This idea that, hey, we're going to take more developmental high school guys, I hope it makes sense. I hope it works out for them. It just seems hard for me to get that level of buy-in from most of your recruits at this point. Maybe I'm wrong. And since we're on the topic of the future of college football, well, I'm starting to think that maybe my opinions about where this is going really don't matter all that much. And I'll explain right after these quick words. So as much as I appreciate that Missouri is in the SEC, this was clearly the best outcome for Missouri and its fans, I have to say, when it comes to, hey, we're just going to break away from the NCAA, make an NFL light, basically, man, that's tough for me as a more of a traditionalist of college football. And obviously the sport is constantly changing, but then again, the sport is always the same too. It's always about, moving the chains and putting points on the board. It's just how you do it and how you stop it. It changes virtually every single year, at least to some degree. But when the sport itself is changing so dramatically, just the way it's being done, well, older fans like me, certainly fans who are even older than me, like my father, for example, has been a fan of Missouri for, since the 1960s or so at this point. I don't think there's, to be honest, even as much as he and I will occasionally be like, I don't know about what they're doing here, we're not going anywhere. We're bought in. We're diehards. And no matter what happens, as long as Missouri is still wearing black and gold and they play every true son and fight Tiger when they run out of the tunnel, we'll be there. That's all there is to it. So if I'm bought in, I have to say that makes me question myself a little bit in terms of, hey, what about these new fans? Do they even know or even care that there was an old way of doing this? For example, I think about my buddy's son, who's about 10 years old. He hangs out with us at the tailgate. Pretty good young quarterback in his own right, by the way. Has the Brady Cook jersey on all the time last year. Is a huge Missouri fan because his dad is a huge Missouri fan. Does he know or even care that 4 or 5 years ago when he was 5, 6 years old, that, it used to just be scholarships and there was no NIL and blah, 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 blah. I don't think they really care. I gotta be honest with you. I think what the new fans, I think what they want is a fun atmosphere to attend, a fun game to go to, and yes, winning. So as long as the Missouri games are still fun to go to, and as long as Eli Drinkwitz and whoever the Missouri coaches of the future are can hopefully win at a decent level, I think Missouri football will be just fine. So the bottom line here is, obviously I can't predict the future, but what I do know is that for better or for worse, no matter where this sport goes in the future, it's really not as much about pleasing people like me or my father, the older. When I say older, I just mean people who have been in for a long time. You could be 25 years old and you could easily qualify for this if you've been a Mizzou fan your whole life. I'm just saying at a certain point, all of us get old. We die and we move on to the other realm. And then the new people come in and they have to be fans as well. I just think too often college football in particular takes those new fans for granted. But you know what? Maybe they're right to. Maybe it is going to work because, again, those 6 Saturdays every single fall, the appeal of that is tough to beat. It really is. So I'm just always interested about where this sport is heading. By this sport, I mean especially college football, because they're driving the bus. But of course, how it affects college basketball and all of the Olympic sports, if you will, and golf and all that good stuff too. It's all very interesting to me. So hopefully this has been interesting to you. Thanks for joining me today on Locked On Mizzou. Appreciate you being here as I snuck one in here at the last second. And thanks for making the show your first listen. For your second listen, check out the portal with my guy, the Scout Master, Brian Smith. If you want to know the latest rumors, portal entries, signings, it's got to be the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked On Mizzou.